Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to TransCelerate, exploring how solutions can enable clinical trial continuity. Today, we're going to explore how several of our existing solutions can best support trial continuity. This is the second of two webinars. We had a webinar yesterday, and this is the second one. So we're welcome to have you with us. My name is Sarah Plush. Move to the next slide, please. My name is Sarah Plush. I'm a director at TransCelerate, and I'm joined today by a colleague of mine, Julie Day. So Julie will be helping to facilitate this discussion panel a bit later. Should you have any feedback or technical questions, you can drop us a note at events@transceleratebioPharmainc.com. We're really excited to bring this discussion panel to you today, and we've had such an immense amount of interest from industry. We had over 500 registrants across 300 companies across the ecosystem interested to register for today's webinar. So we're really excited to get started. We're joined today by a really fantastic list of experts, and Julie will actually introduce them in just a moment. And this group of experts has so much industry experience, but they also have a lot of TransCelerate experience that we're excited to have them share with you. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Julie will do some proper introductions in just a few minutes, but just wanted to give you a preview for some of the experts you'll be hearing from today. Next slide, please. So I should mention that all lines have been muted for your listening pleasure. We just want to make sure that everyone can hear the panelists clearly. You can join this session via your phone or a laptop to connect to audio. And if you want to get a better view of the slides or the presenters, will be on video later, you can click the red arrow in your GoToMeeting pop-up to reduce the size of it. And should you wish to submit some questions throughout the discussion today, you can feel free to do that via the questions panel. You can type your question in and click send, and that submission will be moderated. I should note that this webinar may be recorded in part or in whole. And should you not consent to be a part of that recording, just please drop us a note through the chat function. And please make sure as you consider submitting questions that they're relevant to the topic of the discussion panel today. Great. So one last thing to cover from a technical perspective on the next slide. We will be doing some polling throughout the session today. This is voluntary, it's anonymous. We would ask you to perhaps just experiment and make sure that you know where to find the polling feature. If you can move to the next slide, we'll go ahead and launch this question just as a sample. So what's your favorite color? If you can just participate to make sure that you know how to participate in these polls, this is just really a test question. So it looks like blue is in the lead. We'll give it another moment and then I'll close out the poll. So if you haven't participated yet, feel free to do so. Great. So I'll close that out. I'll share the results. Looks like blue's the winner. And I'll go ahead and get back to the presentation. So just a few points to clarify around the ground rules for this session. So go to the next slide, please. So we want to make sure that this discussion is as helpful as possible. And we want to make sure that people understand that this discussion is completely voluntary, along with the adoption of TransCelerate solutions and tools is completely voluntary. And certainly that folks who adopt those solutions, they have some responsibility to ensure that they're complying with laws and regulations. As people participate in this discussion today, they don't have to identify what company they work for. So when you go to submit a question, you don't need to identify that. And things that we typically we ask that you not discuss or ask questions around is really anything to do with vendors, sites, CROs that you're using, if you're having issues with another party, and any long-term development plans, of course, we would ask that you not show that in the chat or question function. We also can't ask questions specifically about any vendors or the cost of using or implementing TransCelerate solutions. Or which member companies are using solutions. So just wanted to keep those ground rules in mind when you go to submit your questions today and listen into the panel. Fantastic. So we have a really great agenda planned. I'm going to just kick things off by doing a really brief introduction to TransCelerate, just to make sure everyone on the call is grounded. And then majority of our time will be spent with this panel and hearing what they have to say about these existing tools. Fantastic. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll kind of just jump into an overview of TransCelerate. So TransCelerate's a not-for-profit entity, and it's really meant to foster collaboration across the ecosystem. And I think it's important to note that most of the TransCelerate solutions that are developed are free to the industry. And that really is possible because there's a shared mission that our membership holds. And to achieve that mission and that vision, we need to make sure that what's developed is able to be adopted and shared with the industry. And I want to just note that some of our assets, such as the Common Protocol template, have more than 6,500 unique downloads. So we know that our assets are making a difference and they're being used by industry. TransCelerate has some humble beginnings. So just dating back to 2012, you go to the next slide, please. We started the organization with 10 member companies and 5 projects. Fast forward several years later, we've actually grown not only in membership to 20 companies, but we have a very large portfolio of over 25 initiatives. And within each initiative, there's several solutions that really kind of hits on diverse ranges of the clinical trial processes. So really robust portfolio. And actually, if you want to take a view of our portfolio, on the next slide, you can see all of these different projects represent areas where TransCelerate has work underway. I want to just highlight that the projects that you see here in bold and underlined, these are ones that will be touched on today in our panel. So you can see them there. It's patient technology, protocol deviations, quality management, and risk-based monitoring. I should also mention that one of our panelists today also participated on the QTL workstream, so the quality tolerance limits. So while they have not published yet, this person brings some great knowledge to the table as far as what that team's been working on. I also felt while we're on this slide, I did want to mention one last item related to clinical content and reuse. So this is the workstream formerly known as Common Protocol Template. They have a new deliverable that just came out. It can be found on the TransCelerate website under the CC&R asset page, and the deliverable is called CSR Considerations for Studies Disrupted by COVID-19 Pandemic. So this really came about because of the COVID-19 disruption, and regulators issued some guidance, considering ongoing trial operation in the midst of this pandemic. And the TransCelerate's clinical content and reuse team, they quickly kind of gathered a group together of over 50 experts from throughout the TransCelerate network, which actually represented a group of about 15 member companies across 10 countries, which is fantastic. And this group really helped identify some of the key considerations for clinical researchers and research sponsors to consider as they write their clinical study reports that might have been disrupted by COVID-19. So I did just want to, since it was so timely, give that new deliverable a bit of a shout out so that folks could go check it out. So fantastic. Before I hand it over to Julie to introduce our panelists, I would love if we could just do one last question here. I'd love to get a sense for who is joining us today. So I'll go ahead and launch a poll. Maybe you're from a patient group, maybe you're an investigator or a site, maybe you're joining us today from a CRO or service provider, maybe you work for a sponsor company and you're part of a TransCelerate membership, or perhaps you're a sponsor company that's not part of our membership. We'd love to get a sense of who's on the call today. So I'll give it another minute and then we'll close it out. Looks like most of us on the call today are from a TransCelerate member company. So I'll go ahead and close that out. I'll share that response back with the attendees. Looks like we have about 73% that are from our membership and about 13% from our CRO partners. All right. So at this point, I will hand it over to Julie Day. Julie?
Sarah, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's great to be speaking with all of you today. I am one of the program directors here at TransCelerate, and I help support some of our more mature initiatives within the organization. So I'm absolutely honored and privileged to be able to moderate this important webinar panel with all of you. We can move to the next slide. please. Thank you. So we're really hoping that all of you that have joined us today will walk away with a better awareness of TransCelerate's outputs that can be utilized to help ensure trial continuity. And you're going to hear directly from our subject matter experts about these outputs and how they describe the best practices regarding implementation. And as Sarah mentioned, we have a lot of you on our call today, and many of you are from various areas of the R&D spectrum. So welcome to all of you clinical folks, data people, company leaders, regulatory individuals, and safety scientists. I think our panelists will be able to touch on all of your areas in their responses today, so welcome. I do also just want to mention that we encourage questions. So as Sarah mentioned, please feel free to use the chat feature, but we would like to kindly ask that you keep your questions relevant to the topics today. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into great detail about this slide, except to say that we will be focusing our discussions on these topics, namely trial monitoring, protocol deviation, issue and risk management, as well as patient-friendly technology. So hopefully you all had an opportunity to check these out on our website before today's webinar, but if you didn't, that's perfectly okay. You'll have plenty of time after today's call to do a deeper dive. I do also want to mention that we do have other assets and solutions on our website that also are applicable to trial continuity. We won't be focusing on them today, but certainly feel free to peruse our website and check them out. Thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned, we have some fantastic panelists with us today, and I would like to take a few moments to just give you a bit of their background and provide you with a bit of an awareness of their expertise. So I would like to, in no particular order, welcome Esther Huffman O'Keefe to our panel. Esther is an associate director in the monitoring group at Regeneron, where she heads up strategic monitoring activities. Esther has been in clinical trials for 25 years, and her focus has always been on site monitoring processes, technology, continuous improvement, and quality. In her current role, Esther is working towards solutions for RBQM in an outsourced model and finding ways to embed RBM as business as usual. Esther leverages this wealth of experience to strategically oversee, lead, and support the risk-based monitoring workstream, one of TransCelerate's foundational flagship initiatives. So, welcome, Esther. Next, I'd like to introduce Laura Gallucci. Laura has been with TransCelerate for several years. She is from Merck & Company, Inc., also known as MSD for those of you outside of the US and Canada, and she is the company's leadership representative assigned to TransCelerate's Oversight Committee. This is our primary governing body for decisions related to the operational direction of the organization. She is also a TransCelerate program lead and has a really great understanding of all of our initiatives and solutions. Laura draws on our experience as a director of clinical operations for a busy therapeutic area, and she is head of clinical performance, analytics, and innovation to provide this unique perspective. Within Merck, she has the responsibility for driving internal engagement with key stakeholders while also facilitating adoption and internalization of our solutions in alignment with Merck's objectives. So, welcome, Laura. Next, I'd like to introduce Melissa Sukrin. Melissa has completed her undergraduate studies in chemical engineering at Villanova University, has an MBA from the University of Rhode Island, and is a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. She is currently pursuing a doctorate in law and policy at Northeastern University. Melissa's career spans manufacturing, research, quality, EH&S, strategy, and operations. Initially working as a production engineer and as a manufacturing supervisor, she transitioned to Pfizer in 2001. Roles at Pfizer have given Melissa a breadth of experience across Pfizer's divisions and functions. Her leadership in operations and expertise in risk management led to her current role at Pfizer as head of quality risk management for clinical development. She is the lead author of TransCelerate's paper on risk management, a contributor to the upcoming quality tolerance limits paper publication, and the lead of TransCelerate's quality management system workstream. Welcome, Melissa. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Pete Schaeffer. Pete joins TransCelerate with over 20 years of experience at GlaxoSmithKline, working in both the spaces of preclinical and clinical. His primary focus is on the clinical trial continuous improvement and business operations. For the last 18 months, Pete has led and supported an important sub-team within TransCelerate's Patient Technology Initiative, an initiative that is really driving to improve the patient experience in clinical trials via technology. Leading this sub-team allows Pete to leverage his years of experience while aligning his passions to improve clinical trials. So welcome, Pete. Welcome to all you panelists. Okay, So I think before we get to the crux of why we are all here, it's probably important to just provide a little bit of context. And this webinar panel is actually occurring at a time unlike any other in our history. And I'm not sure when all of you were impacted by our current pandemic, but it's probably safe to say within the last several months. And during this time, we saw around the globe a disruption and basically all of humanity really striving to focus effort on healthcare. So not only for those workers working on the front line, but we also saw companies around the world who were somewhat urgently forced to reprioritize their strategies and their activities to adjust to this new reality. So these unexpected changes, I believe, shined an even bigger spotlight on the pharmaceutical industry. And we witnessed, and I believe we continue to witness, an unprecedented global mobilization to support trial continuity during these times of disruption. And we're doing so all with the aim of monitoring the safety and the integrity of ongoing clinical research. So I think that backdrop is important because we are dealing with something that has never really happened in our lifetime. So I would like to start our panel with a fairly big question. And I'm going to ask each of you. So we'll start with you, Esther. And the question is, I would love for you to describe at a high level the solutions within your initiative and help our audience understand if there has been any specific changes in the applicability and or value of these solutions as a result of this latest global disruption. And if so, how? Esther?
Thank you, Julie. First, I just want to say hello and what an honor it is to be here to represent the risk-based monitoring workstream with TransCelerate. As you can see here, and as Julie mentioned earlier, the risk-based monitoring workstream is one of the flagship solution offerings with TransCelerate. And so we have a number of assets that have been in place for quite a while. So the original RBM methodology paper came out in 2013. That means we have 6 or 7 really great years of leveraging this asset and member companies who have taken the opportunity to find the best fit in terms of ways to apply that framework within each of our unique member companies. So what's interesting about the current pandemic from the risk-based monitoring perspective is that risk-based monitoring is a terrific solution for a problem like a global pandemic. Because the framework asks us to think about what's most critical and find ways to mitigate risk in those critical components within the course of monitoring and overseeing and executing a study. So the initial methodology paper really is perfectly suited for a pandemic situation because it does give you the opportunity to think about what are the risks unique to the study. What are the risks that we may not have anticipated but are actually occurring during the execution of the study? And how can we best find the best way to minimize the risk from continuing to occur, protect the patient safety and data quality throughout the course of the study? So again, the pandemic is really a unique opportunity to employ the assets that we see here. Probably the most commonly referenced asset from the RBM framework is that the second chevron here, the risk assessment and categorization tool, or the RACT. The RACT can be as simple or as complicated as member companies like it to be. It's really an approach to give study teams a tool to articulate what's most critical in the study and how do we want to minimize the risks that occur there. After that, I think in that first chevron, there are a number of assets that really are applicable now in the pandemic as well. They give deeper dive information or learnings, best practices from member companies to help operationalize what you discussed during that risk assessment. So for example, there's a paper within our assets that focuses on source data verification and source data review, or SDV and SDR. And that's a very unique concept during a pandemic as well, because we have to rethink what's the value of sending a CRA to a site to look at source records. And if we can't do that because of a situation like our current disruption, how do we best monitor the study otherwise? And that's where the rest of the risk-based monitoring framework is nicely applied. The last chevron that you see on this slide is the risk indicator library, or a host of KRIs, key risk indicators, that study teams can use to assess the quality of the data as the data is entered by the site or provided by the site. And those really allow us to do away with the reliance on CRA or site monitor visiting the site as the only quality control mechanism during the course of the study. So the reliance on other ways of monitoring and managing a study that the risk-based monitoring solution provides really provide a nice opportunity for business continuity during a disruption like this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Laura, may I ask you the same question, please?
Sure. So unlike RBM, protocol deviations is one of the newer work streams. So together with my co-lead and a team of about 20 people across all of the functional areas involved in the clinical trial process, when we came together, we were talking about all of these issues we're having with protocol deviations. And it took us a little bit to actually narrow down what was it that was causing all of this confusion, frustration, and noise in the system. And we realized that at the basis, it was really a difference of understanding and lack of clarity on the interpretation of what actually is the definition of a protocol deviation. And so we spent some time really going through that. And the tools that we have offered today really help guide companies and sites around what is a protocol deviation. So there's 3 elements of it. There's a process guide, which is a pretty detailed Word document, which goes through every single step, starting at the very beginning, focusing on the definition, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Then there's a map that shows you holistically from the define stage all the way through to the end. However, you process the protocol deviations within your company system to where you record them and put them in the CSR and archive them. And it illustrates several feedback loops throughout the cycle, which are very important because it's not a one-time thing. Although you may start with a definition, you'll learn things along the way, so you can always refine it. So it's not a static process. And then the last tool that we offer is a template, similar to the RACT, where it helps you think through what are the approaches that you want to take for your particular study or program, or it can be used across a company as well, and have a place to document them if you don't already have another tool within your company. So holistically, if you look at those, I mentioned the definition. When we started talking about the definition, even though there is a definition listed in the ICH E3 guidance about what is a protocol definition, we realized that there was actually a lot of noise in the system. And what do I mean by noise? Those are things that aren't even protocol deviations that get into that protocol deviation process, and they add gunk to the system. They block it up. My favorite example is an actual reported deviation of too many staples in the margin of the informed consent. Whose protocol itemizes how many staples you're permitted in your document? That's just silly. So it's things like that to help you think about what is a protocol deviation. And we offer 3 concepts to really build on that current definition. The first is that an event occurred. So it's real, it's not theoretical. The second is that it's related to a data point or process that's outlined in your protocol or your documents referenced by the protocol. So the same concepts that Esther talked about with risk-based assessments, thinking through what's the most important element for your protocol and your study, those are the elements that you want to think about as being related to occurring for your protocol deviation. And then the third element is that the protocol deviations are independent of fault, blame, or circumstance. And that's very, very true today. We like to use the analogy of an auto accident. Did the 2 cars collide? Yes or no? If it's a yes, then the insurance companies and the other authorities will figure out the root cause and why, but it happened. So just like a lab tube broke en route, it happened. It's not anybody's fault. But if you don't understand the occurrence, you don't have any idea of what areas you would need to look at for potential mitigations in the future. So once we have a clearer definition about what is a protocol deviation, then the second bit comes into play, which is very I hate to use the word important again, but it is important, especially in today's age. And that's identifying what is important of all of those protocol deviations, which subset are important. And that's really where we are leveraging the ICH E6R2 risk assessment components into the definition of protocol deviations. So there are some decision trees that are available within the toolkit that can really help your company think through these. And right now, it's a good idea or a best practice to kind of rethink about those. So not only were they important when you first identified them, now what is really important? If you only have a few elements that your CRAs can focus on or the investigators can focus on, what's most important to your study, so that if you apply a flag or a prefix to your system of recording protocol deviations, you'll be able to then quickly analyze those and make an assessment about the impact of the current situation around the world on your study, because it certainly will vary from location to location. So it's not going to be uniformly applied, but if you have a robust system, you'll be able to make that assessment. So all those tools are available, and they've been posted earlier than anticipated because of the application today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Laura. Melissa, your thoughts, please, on high-level overview of your initiative solutions, as well as any impact, applicability, and/or value.
Thanks, Julie. Just to talk a little bit about the quality management system assets, we've had them in place for several years, and they explore both the general concept of a quality management system and then detail the components of each element of it. So over the years, we've been able to talk about and build tools around each element of the quality management system. So you can see some of the assets that are here. The most recent ones are about assessing your CQMS. So if you have a clinical quality management system and you want to know how's it measuring up, there's a tool to be able to do that. There's also some recent publications on risk management and the process management framework. Although it's part of a separate work stream, there's also some upcoming publications on quality tolerance limits as well. So if you're looking for some insight into some ideas about how to look at those new requirements, that's a great resource to look at. In answer to the question about how do these apply during the pandemic or during a global challenge, an external factor that might come into the process, the nice thing about the quality management system is it's set up to deal with those types of situations. That's not to say we didn't have to change anything, but there are processes in place that help us deal with the issues that arise, the new risks that might be introduced. It helps to have a knowledge management process in place already so that you can rely on what we've learned from dealing with other situations. So many elements of the QMS very much apply to this situation. Obviously, like everything, we've had to adapt to the specifics, but the underlying processes have certainly held up for application during any external disruption. Those quality signals that can come in externally or internally, and having the clinical quality management system in place helps us have a way to respond to those without panicking. So I think it's been a helpful tool from that perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pete, and Pete is going to cover patient technology.
Thank you for that, Melissa. Yeah, so the team set out about 2 years ago, working with sponsor companies to understand how to apply patient technology to clinical trials. And we quickly learned from those conversations, there was elements of just feeling overwhelmed. Where do I start? Because there's so many steps and there's so many aspects to deploying patient technology on trials, and quickly become hard to get started or know the steps to follow through. We also learned with that multiple steps in complexity, there were numerous stakeholders and numerous questions to ask and things to learn and apply and quickly iterate around. So we also then discovered that one of the elements of you may or may not know the stakeholders to talk to. And then if you do know the stakeholders to talk to, you may not know the right questions they ask. So we all know that knowing what you don't know is sometimes not knowing what you don't know is the danger, right? So the knowns are, when I know I don't know something, it's fine. But if I don't know, I don't know. That's the real danger part. So we learned that's definitely a fear and a challenge for people trying to onboard patient technology on trials. So the team rallied around that with all the data we found from sponsor companies and said, well, how can we really enable and accelerate trials? Using patient technology, facing technology for trials to collect richer data, more objective data, enhance the patient experience. That's really what we rallied around them. And we set out to develop solutions to help people do that. And we developed a framework where we take Jim, or kind of fictional character who's trying to implement patient technology on a trial, through this journey of how do I think about my strategy, how do I think about my regulatory landscape, how do I engage patients, how do I engage vendors, how do I learn from that, iterate around my solution to deploy it. And so that's some of the solutions you'll find when you go to our website, and you'll see that journey that hopefully helps you navigate the experience and informs you what's going on. And we published the framework and our white paper around perspectives on technology and the implementation. And then early this year, after we did that work, we also realized patients and vendors are also a big consideration. So our first interviews were with sponsors. We realized patients and vendors are a big part of this, as well as sites. So we went out and said we need to extend our reach a bit, and then we developed vendor and sponsor engagement tools. So one thing we heard from some of our discussions is that those meetings and engagements with vendors, sometimes they only occur when there's a problem, or sometimes the expectations aren't clear. So we tried to set out tools and ways of working to help you have more recent engagements, more frequent engagements, set up meetings that come to an outcome and have success. So I think we all struggle with that. We all want to have great meetings, but sometimes they're not structured ideally the way we would like. So we've given some tips and suggestions to do that. And we had the great honor of working with a patient advisory board. So it was really a great experience, learned a tremendous amount. And we pulled together those considerations from a patient perspective to bring those and allow folks to see what's important from patients and help to keep the patient at the center of their design for implementing technology. So a couple of things around these. Really what's important here is you're going to benefit from not only the team that has a tremendous amount of experience of implementing technology, but you're going to find vendor perspectives, you're going to find patient perspectives. So you're really going to benefit from all this knowledge of others. So you don't have to use your resources to learn. You can learn from this group already to accelerate your deployment of patient technology. So I really encourage you to look at those resources, assets, provide feedback, give us some insights. As for applicability, this is definitely as applicable as it was before, and we're all probably feeling the pressure to accelerate having technology onto trials. So as patients and sites are under restrictions, as they may not feel comfortable leaving their house or their areas, we're looking for ways to engage remotely, like we did today by having this webinar. So we're trying to leverage technology. So these tools, we're hoping I would advocate, would help you get started, think about things along the way, what questions they ask, what to ask and when. I can't give you all the answers, but I'm hoping these tools and the team's hoping these tools will lead you to kind of a structured approach and how to go about implementing technology onto your trials. So thanks, Julie.
Oh, thank you, and thank you all for those answers. I think it was important to lay that foundation as we turn to a few more specific questions. So Esther, I'm going to ask you this next question, and Melissa, admittedly, it might touch a little bit on your stuff as well. So I welcome you to chime in if you'd like to. But the question is really around, when we think about clinical trials, rightfully a primary concern is and will continue to be human subject safety. So I'm wondering if you can share with us your thoughts around how the solutions within the RBM initiative have aided trial continuity to preserve human subject safety, particularly in light of what's happening today.
Thanks, Julie. Great question. So you're absolutely right. All of us have a primary focus of patient safety. The RBM foundational framework actually is entirely built on ensuring subject safety and data quality. And so it gives a number of ways of asking the study team to think about what's critical and how can you protect subject safety while ensuring protocol compliance and high levels of data integrity. So it's really, RBM has been built on the premise of protecting that subject safety since its inception. I think what's interesting about the pandemic, though, is that it, as we've said, it introduces new risks. including risks to subject safety. And I think leveraging that risk assessment at the very beginning of the RBM process is an important approach to considering during the pandemic, what are the new risks to subject safety? How do you balance the risk of keeping a subject on study drug or in the protocol windows of compliance, or against asking the subject to come to a site for the purpose of receiving their next dose or replacement study IP. And of course, that starts to beg the question of how do you balance that risk? Can you take alternative solutions that maybe you hadn't anticipated when you launched your study? Is it possible to direct ship study drug to a patient? Is it possible to leverage a visiting healthcare provider? Or is it really most important that the subject actually physically comes to the site in order to keep them on drug and maintain the safety within the protocol, balanced against subject safety during the pandemic? Additionally, the current disruption actually also brings additional risk of safety to the site staff, who now may be asked to come to work to keep the subjects in the study, to collect important data or distribute important study investigational product. But that introduces risk, of course, to the study staff. And so I think from a sponsor perspective or the CRO perspective, we're asked to also find ways to mitigate any risk that might be introduced as a result of the pandemic for the site staff, as well as the CRAs or the site monitors, who may still be required to try to visit a site if a site is willing to allow that. And I think what's unique about risk-based monitoring is it gives a framework to consider those risks and then find the best way to minimize risk in each of those categories. So for example, can you find a different way to deliver the drug to the patient? Can you find a different way to collect the data from the patient? Can you find a different way to oversee the data once it's been collected by the site in order to protect all of those elements of safety while continuing your important clinical trial and ensuring data quality is high, as well as the continuity of the study?
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Melissa, anything to add?
I'll just quickly add that one of the underpinnings of having a risk-based quality management system is that focus on human subject protection and reliability of trial results. And there really isn't a time I can think of when that's been more important. And Esther gave some great examples of how our perception of that, what that means, has even changed in the last couple of months. So that focus needs to stay, but that focus also helps us keep our eye on what's important. And having that focus on what's important also lets us then respond and put controls in place for the right things. And whether that's through the monitoring plan or process changes or other controls we may have at our disposal, again, having the QMS gives you the flexibility to look at what are those different options for controls when some of them might not work in the current circumstances. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you both. And listening to your responses, Esther and Melissa, you mentioned data integrity, data quality, and I know we got a few questions around the patient technology initiative when our audience members registered for this webinar. So Pete, I'm going to ask you this next question, and I'm wondering if you can, you talked through your overview in the initiative that it's really focused on accelerating the use of patient technology in clinical trials to facilitate richer additional objective data collection, also while enhancing the patient experience. But I'm wondering if you can briefly describe or provide some of your thoughts on how currently available assets in this space may aid or have aided in ensuring data integrity and quality during the times of this particular disruption and others.
Sure, and I think, we're looking at it from integrity, starting almost preventing or planning for good data integrity, so you don't have those issues coming down the line. So from our standpoint, or my standpoint, I think of it three ways: is understanding. So that's having understanding between patients, sites, and your technology, right? So you understand all those elements, and you understand how they're going to behave under different circumstances. You're planning for this. You're taking consideration of the technology you adopt, the potential limitations of that technology, whether it be the technology itself or the regions it's in, things like that. And finally, what I call adoption. And this adoption or adopting is around there's so many handoffs or folks in the chain, there's so many stakeholders, you have to make sure that you're having frequent interactions and really setting common expectations. So for understanding some of the assets we have of patient considerations, help provide some insights from a patient perspective of what they expect, how they expect to interact with technology, maybe apps or devices and things like that. And if you have a better understanding, have that engagement, we advocate early and often engagement with patients to understand the perspective, it then reduces the unexpected response you might get. And when you look at something saying, well, I didn't expect that, but the patient using the device seemed very intuitive to give that answer. So I think some frequency of this happens. That's where we get some disconnect. So advocating patient engagement. Also, we have site survey tools, site engagement tools to allow conversations in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of implementing technology on the trial to get that site perspective. So that is very important. They're the representative, they're engaging with the patient much more frequently than clinical operations teams. So understanding their points of view and taking that feedback and seeing the responses we're getting, because we had one expectation on paper, but reality is sometimes very different. So opening that two-way dialogue is really important. And the vendor tools I mentioned as well, that kind of make that connection with vendors. And then planning. So we set out to say, well, through our discussion guide, what are the questions and who do you want to engage in the considerations you want to have? So what questions should you be asking your tech partners? What questions should you be asking your regulatory folks to say, well, how do we ensure the chain of data? How do we ensure an expectation and user experience with our technology app, et cetera? So many of the things we have are looking at preventative natures or trying to consider the experience and what would happen. And finally, probably the most important thing, as I mentioned, so with so many players involved, we set out a framework and discussion guide to say, well, here's who you should engage when. For the most part, we try to lay that out. Obviously, it's very complex, so we probably don't have all the answers, but we try to provide as much as we can. But really then trying to make connections to say, how do I follow that data chain or that flow through the cycle? And how do I make sure my handoffs and the appropriate people are informed, they have their input into that design, they have their input in that chain of flow, and they also bring up the potential issues or risks. So as the world changes, as technology changes, as things happen, what could potentially break that flow? So if you get all the right players in the room, the tech folks, the regulatory, the patient, the sites, and have those open conversations, I'm not saying that you can 100% protect yourself from data integrity issues, but I think you can plan. So you'll have mitigation plans in place. You'll have expectations using this broader tool set across TransCelerate. If something does happen, you have access to things to manage data integrity issues. And I think I don't have enough time to go through everything, but I do talk a bit more detail in a recent article in the Clinical Leader forum. There's basically an online forum magazine that you can take a look at, where I really talk about the importance of connecting all those stakeholders and making sure you have tools, meetings, and you're staying in frequent contact and you're sharing information and really having those discussions. So it takes a village to make this happen. I think sometimes we get a little siloed sometimes and just think about our area, but we need to expand our thinking sometimes, especially in situations like today, where it really takes everyone working together to overcome some of the challenges. So hopefully that helps people, Julie.
Yeah, and couldn't agree more. Thanks, Pete. So this next question, Melissa, I'd like to send to you, but I do welcome Esther or Laura to weigh in because it may be applicable to RBM and protocol deviations as well. But in listening to Pete's response and talking about, what's going on in the patient technology space and how it can support what's happening today, I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on how does the QMS initiative and possibly even the QTL, the Quality Tolerance Limits Initiative, how does it support these efforts and allow teams to really focus on the most critical data being collected?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I talked a little bit about the quality management system helping focus on the things that matter most. So, and having the foundation, human subject protection, and the reliability of trial results. But that also gives us the basis to think about things like what's critical to quality in a given study and how does that translate into other areas during study conduct. So when you're thinking about the connection between what's critical to quality and what those other processes and systems are, certainly they should be connected to things like the KRIs that we use in risk-based monitoring. You would want to be able to see the connection, if possible, right, between the quality tolerance limits and those factors that are critical to quality. So I think those are places where you want to make the connection across the QMS and across all the activities that are going on in study execution, so that if your focus is on the things that matter most, that those are showing up in the various processes in a risk-based way. So I think quality tolerance limits being a somewhat new thing for us as an industry have given us insights into reliability of trial results in a way that we perhaps hadn't anticipated before this latest externality. So I think it's just another example of how elements of the quality management system can help us through various situations to be able to have our finger on the pulse of those things that are important to us if we've defined them well. I don't know if Esther or Laura, if you want to comment further.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I just want to add a comment. I agree that the solutions are very interlinked, and having a quality management system and QTLs in place actually enables risk-based monitoring to work as it's intended, right, with the best possible outcome. For example, critical data is almost always focused on safety and primary endpoints. So we may set up a study such that we have KRIs, or those key risk indicators, looking for variation or lack of variability in events, or the rate of that events are being reported. We may see a site that pops out as an outlier and think that something is wrong. The site's not reporting adverse events, and that's indicative of a problem. In a traditional model, we would say to the CRA, go do a bunch of SDV and figure out what the problem is. But with risk-based monitoring and a full QMS in place, it actually enables us to think about it differently. And in times of a pandemic, when we can't just go do a bunch of SDV, we can take advantage of the other components of a risk-based monitoring model, like an offsite or a remote visit, where a CRA or a site monitor can take a meaningful intervention with the site and say, we've been looking and noticing you haven't reported a lot of adverse events recently. Is that because your subjects can't come in and report any events? Is that because you can't get to the site or access the case report form to enter them, right? And start to piece apart exactly where the root cause of the problem is, which is absolutely what risk-based monitoring and a quality management system is intended to do. The RBM asset has actually had for a long time the concepts of source review for adverse events, or evaluating what you actually get from your SDV activities, and thinking about different ways to meaningfully collect and manage the study, so that a remote monitoring visit is not a carbon copy of what a CRA does on site. It's a more meaningful, away from the site interaction that's focused on issue resolution in a different way. And I think that ultimately supports the QMS.
Right. And this is Laura. I can add that we've actually received the question a few times about what's the relationship between a protocol deviation and a quality tolerance limit. Are they interchangeable? And the answer is no, they have different purposes. Whereas Melissa talked about the quality tolerance limits as I'll say a broader a sense of quality of that protocol or program as a whole. A protocol deviation is much more specific and granular. It's focusing on an individual patient or an individual site, but by cleanly defining what is a protocol deviation to start with, and then consistently categorizing it across that study or protocol into what's important and non-important, and having that application around the world, from having it documented in whatever your quality plan is, or whatever your identification tool is, that will help make that clean assessment. So perhaps you look at a larger number of protocol deviations, and perhaps that would or would not impact your quality tolerance limit. It's going to be quite study specific, but it's going to give you an indicator of how your study's going.
Fantastic. Thank you for those responses. Super helpful. But Laura, I think I want to stick with you actually for this next question. And I am just checking time, so it might be our last one before we open it up to the audience. We'll see how we go. But I would like to talk a little bit more specifically around trial continuity, obviously the ongoing pandemic, because we have received a lot of questions, not only through the registration process, but just in general around this growing curiosity as to how to best navigate specific activities like remote monitoring, SDV, SDR, SOP deviations, missing data, and just general trial oversight. There's this craving on, some direction here. And so I'm wondering if you can share some thoughts about one or more of these, challenges, and speak to how the initiatives that you touch can be leveraged to help address some of these questions being asked in these spaces.
Sure. I'll start by just reminding folks that most companies actually have processes and plans in place today that they use to manage floods and hurricanes, wildfires, transportation strikes, all of these things that happen in terms of everyday life. In our current situation, it's like they're all happening at the same time. So certainly the volume is increased, but those fundamental concepts and approaches that the companies take are still sound. So don't think about it as overwhelming. Think very methodically about what tools and processes do you already have in place? How do you need to adjust them for any local approaches? Because although the volume's increasing, as we've seen with everything else, we've got to be able to be pretty agile in our adjustment, because just as the floods and the hurricanes, are different around the world, so is the effect of the current COVID pandemic. So it's quite variable. And if you look at those overarching approaches and think about what's the local approach and how to apply those processes locally, it actually will then help your overall quality plan or your overall approach to your study. A lot of the tools that have been presented in this session were available beforehand to really help with that overarching study oversight. We've talked about the risk and issue identification and management. Those are tools that are available and valid for both yesterday, but today and tomorrow also. So again, think about things pretty holistically, because all of these things do interlink. So if you do evaluations and work within your company to solve a piece of that problem, it's going to overlay and interact with the other pieces. So you don't have to do every single one individually. Think about them a little bit more holistically. So for example, you may be thinking about, oh, I've got missing data, but ask yourself, is it really missing? Esther's example earlier, is that really missing, or is it just a data entry delay? Is it just because the assessment was done at an alternate location and the results haven't yet arrived to their final destination? So all of these pieces in place really help you think through a methodical approach that you can then adapt for today, and it'll still be available for tomorrow as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Laura. And I do welcome anybody else to chime in if they would like to respond to that as well. Okay. All right. So I'm just checking the time, and I do want to have an opportunity to open up to our chat. And I know that a couple of questions did come in throughout our discussions in the last hour. So it looks like this question, if you will, is specific for you, Pete. The question is, they would like to know your opinion on the current pandemic. Okay, let me appreciate. They would like to know Pete's opinion if the current pandemic has created an industry acceleration of interest and potential adoption of patient-focused technology approaches.
Yes, so in my opinion, absolutely. I think I said this yesterday. We had this question is we're not going back from where we are today, right? So we're entered a new paradigm, new way of working, a new expectation. I've always wondered what company was going to disrupt how we do clinical trials. And it turns out a pandemic is going to change the way we do clinical trials going forward. So absolutely, in my opinion, this obviously me saying this, I see a huge adoption and acceleration to look to use technology on the trials, multiple points of view. And I think some of the assets we have may help that. So I'm hoping that people will look at those assets and provide feedback and leverage that knowledge to do that. But absolutely, I think this is the new norm, as they say.
Great. Thank you, Pete, for that. So this next question, it's a pretty general one. So I guess I'll ask each of you to maybe provide a brief response, and it's really around for those companies that haven't adopted any of these solutions, or maybe in the early part of adopting. Do you have any words of wisdom of kind of the best approaches or next steps that they can take to get started or continue onward in light of what's going on today? I guess I will start with Esther. Why don't we start with you?
Perfect. Thank you. I was frozen in time there, but I seem to be back now. Yeah, so the RBM workstream actually has a really great interactive user guide on the TransCelerate website. And it'll walk you through the concepts within the RBM framework, kind of one step at a time. And I really encourage anyone who hasn't thought about how to apply RBM in their company to go take a look at that, because it's a very adaptive solution, and there are as many varieties of RBM as there are companies and CROs and teams working on that process for their company. I recommend that you start with what you can do. Do a risk assessment on one study and see what it's like. We have a racked tool on the website that's available for free. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. Otherwise, your company can invest in a number of technologies. There are a million capabilities out there, but it's as simple as starting with what you can do, defining what's critical for your study, and thinking about how you want to execute your study differently based on the upfront thinking about what's critical and where the risks might come in.
Fantastic, thanks. Laura, how about you?
Sure. So within protocol deviations, I would actually start with the map because it shows you so many different feedback loops. It emphasizes that it's not a static process, that you can really start at any place. And as your company, if they haven't already had internal conversations, not only about what's important, but what's really important. You know, you may only have a few minutes, the site might only have a few minutes with the patient. So what's really important for your particular study, and making sure that you're assessing those protocol deviations cleanly. That would probably be the best place to start.
Great, thank you. Melissa, your thoughts, please.
I think one of the important things about implementing any change is adopting a change management approach. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need outside resources to do it, but just paying attention to the stakeholders that are involved, from the sponsors through the people that are going to use the process. And making sure you're doing that in a planful way will help with success. Beyond that, for the clinical quality management system, I would start with the resources that are freely available on the TransCelerate website or online in general, whatever floats your boat, and look to those for some free advice. I think there's no wrong place to start. If you start somewhere, that's great. I have a personal preference for risk management, but that's just because I really like it. I think it connects to a lot of different elements of the protocol and gets through, you know, from the design through the conduct of the study and all the way through to reporting. So that's just a personal preference. You can start anywhere you want, but the start somewhere message that you're hearing, I think, applies to the quality management system as well.
Fantastic. Pete?
Yeah, I encourage people to start, right? Sometimes we kind of hesitate or we think about things a little too long. So I encourage people to start, and they can start by going to our website and look at the journey of Jim that lays out from strategy development, implementation, engaging regulatory. So it lays those aspects out. I would love you to start with a strategy and have that in place and think about your patient technology strategy. I know in the real world, that's not always the case. So the tools are designed to really pick up anywhere in the cycle you are. So I'd say whether you're getting started or you have technology already embedded, just where you're at in that process, just go out, use those tools, leverage them as much as you can, and hopefully they help.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm just checking the time. We have quickly come up at the top of the hour. So I do believe we've got one last polling question for our audience, for those of us that are still with us. If you don't mind opening that poll, We would love to get your feedback, and if you could please kindly indicate which response best applies to you about this session and its value. Thank you. Great. I can't agree more. Thank you. This means that our panelists really appreciate all of the subject matter expertise that you provided to us today. And a big thank you to our audience who joined us today and for providing us your questions, not only during the registration process, but also during this webinar. Please feel free to visit us on TransCelerateBiopharmaInc.com. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, Accelerate Innovate, please feel free to do so. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.
Goodbye.